Hey, I'm Stephanie Rublitz. Welcome to my channel. Today we are talking about how to insert a zipper by hand. Alright, so when I first started sewing, I did everything by hand because that's what I had. I had two of them and they worked just fine. It wasn't long though until I started doing bigger projects and I started borrowing family members' sewing machines and really getting into the whole sewing machine end of things. The thing was, is sometimes I would just get frustrated at trying to get something to work with a sewing machine and I would give up and just do it by hand because I knew I could do it better by hand. It would take me longer, but it would look great. And every time I did that, I sort of felt like a failure. Like I wasn't like being a real sewer if I wasn't doing it by machine, which is so ridiculous, but that's how I felt at the time. Now, as time went on, yeah, I did learn how to do everything I needed to do on a sewing machine, which was great. But a little while ago, I was listening to a podcast. I think I'd like gone back through old episodes of the Love to Sew podcast because I hadn't heard them all. And I'll see if I can find it. If I can find it, I'll link it below. But they were interviewing somebody who taught couture sewing. She was talking about how, yes, there's absolutely room for sewing machines and couture sewing, but how sewing by hand is so important. And there are certain things like putting in zippers that she just never ever would bother doing with a machine because you can get such a much better effect by hand. Okay, why else would somebody want to put in a zipper by hand other than trying to be more couture? Well, there's a few reasons. One, what if your sewing machine dies? Two, what if you are at an event, you've traveled, you've gone to a wedding, and somebody's zipper pops? Or hey, what if you're going to that wedding and you decide maybe 14 hours before you leave that you need to have a new outfit, and that leaves you hand sewing in the passenger seat of your car while somebody else drives? I'm not judging, we've all been there. And so you just need to know how to do things by hand sometimes because those skills are so useful and they really are sort of your core skills for sewing. And so yes, machines are great, machines are amazing, but to know how to do the basic things by hand, to me, in my sewing practice, is very important. And so when I made my shorts last week, which are the ones I'm wearing here, they have a side zip. And so I decided that I was going to put both of the zippers in by hand, and that's what I did. And I made a little mock-up here because these shorts and the other ones I made are so heavily patterned, it just, I couldn't record it. It would have been too difficult to really show you what I was doing. So we're going to pretend this is a dress. I've made myself a zip in the dress. It is not a invisible zipper. This is what I had in my stash, but I mean, as you can see, except for the pull head, like you can hardly see it. So I'm gonna show you how I put the zipper in by hand, and it was so much fun actually. So anyway, it's a good skill to have. All right, so here we go. I have my practice little mock-up sort of back of a garment here. I've got 2 layers of fabric and I have sewn what would be like the back of the skirt or whatever seam is already sewn. Now, in a real garment, I would leave the rest of the back open so that I could try it on and do a fitting. So we're gonna pretend that I've done a fitting and I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna baste the top of that seam together. You can do it by hand, you can do it by machine. I'm really just concerned with putting the zipper in by hand, so I'm gonna baste that by machine right now. All right, so I've basted the rest of that seam and I've gone and pressed the seam allowance open. So everything is nice and tidy, nice and flat, and we're ready to start putting in our zipper. Obviously, this is not the zipper that I would actually use with this fabric, but sewing from a stash is what we're doing today. So I'm gonna flip my fabric over so that it is right side up, and I'm going to just double check with my ruler, and I'm gonna measure on my zipper actually from the center of my teeth outward, how far away from the center of my teeth do I want my seam line to be. And it looks like about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just gonna use my ruler and I'm going to mark 1/4 of an inch away from my basted seam line. And I'm just doing this with chalk, but if you want something that's got a little bit more staying power, use whatever you need to use. All right, some people like to baste their zipper on first before they put their guideline, but I like my fabric to be nice and flat so I can get a straight line. So now that that's on, I'm going to pin my zipper onto my fabric, and I'm just going to keep checking that the very center of my zipper teeth are running down that basted seam. Now, one thing that's really helping me here is the fact that my fabric is laying on my mat, so I'm able to bounce my pins off. If I was working on a garment that was whole, obviously there would be the front of the garment there. So I would just slide my ruler in and I could bounce my pins off of my ruler. That's just something that I find really helpful. Now that I have that pinned on, I'm going to baste it into place with a contrasting thread. So I'm just going to soak my thread here, and I'm going to use just a really big basting stitch to hold my zipper in place. When I do this step, I prefer to have everything laying as flat as possible because I'm worried that I'm going to kind of mess it up if I let it get too wrinkly or if I'm letting it drape over my hand. That's just a me thing. You might have a different way that you like doing it. All right, so my basting stitches are in. Now I need to go ahead and actually stitch the zipper in. So I have my matching thread, which you can hardly see because it matches. I'm gonna start by burying my knot behind my seam allowance. Once I pull my thread topside, I'm just going to run a very teeny tiny little back stitch all down that chalk line that I drew. And I'm really just back stitching a couple of threads back, and then I'm bringing my needle back out about 1/8 of an inch, I guess, maybe a little bit more, away from that stitch. And I'm just gonna allow that back stitch to run the whole length of my chalk outline, and then I will repeat it above. If you are using something like chalk that rubs off really easily, just make sure that you're starting with a line that's closest to you so that if you rub it off, it's not that big of a deal because you're rubbing it off as you're sewing along it, and you're not gonna rub off the one that you have yet to sew. Here's a quick peek at how my stitches are looking. Alright, so I have all of my stitches done. Now I need to pull out my basting stitches. There we go. Now before I pull out my center basting stitches, I'm just gonna go and give it a quick press under the iron. You know what, I gotta remember to use my other seam ripper for this. This guy's usually my normal seam ripper, but this one with the ball is actually way more helpful for this because you put the end with the ball inside your seam and that keeps you from stabbing and ripping into your fabric. So I've got the ball end in and I can pretty much just slide that along and undo that whole basted seam. There we go. I'm just gonna pull all the threads out. An eraser can really help with this, but the thing is when you got a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, erasers and tape, man, I just can't keep those around. So, pardon me while I pick threads. All right, there we go. Other than the zipper head, it's pretty much invisible as far as zippers go. Yeah, so there you go. If you find zippers frustrating, so satisfying. Alright, so there is how I put in my zippers by hand. I am going to make a playlist of hand sewing techniques because they're just so useful. They're darn useful to have. They're good core skills. But I also recognize they're the type of thing that you might watch the video today and go, oh, that's really good to know. But maybe you don't actually need to put in a zipper by hand for another year, year and a half. So I'm gonna make a playlist so it's super easy for you to find all of the hand sewing skills. And I'm just gonna, like, every once in a while, I'm gonna pop a new one in there. So I hope that was informative. I hope that was helpful. I hope that you're having a great, great week. Have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next time. Oh, if you haven't, subscribe below. I forget to say that sometimes. Have a good one.